Welcome to DFC on the Green. I'm Jason Gilbo. With me is Chris Etherington, taking a look at the Genesis Open on DraftKings. Coming off a Pebble Beach tournament that was pretty fun. A little bit of a surprise winner. Were you expecting that?
Yeah, just kind of gloss over Ted Potter a little bit. It happens. I had a lot of guys in my lineup that were up there as well, but unfortunately, no winners. Obviously, Patrick Reed is the pretty much the guy that has a bit of a sour taste in my mouth for missing the cut. I look back and just to see what was the difference between him and Ches, and sure enough, Ches had 53 points more than Patrick Reed. So if I picked Ches instead of Reed, I would have obviously had a really good week. But yeah, stuff like that happens where it comes down to one golfer and you just have to move on.
You say you gloss over Potter casually, but everyone glossed over Potter because no one played him. He was like 0.7% owned on average last week.
Yeah. Apparently in the $4, he was 0.1%. So if you didn't have him, you were not in the top 5, basically, not in the top 10. Yeah, he's just one of those names where his stats won't pop up or his recent play or course history won't show up. And it's just one of those weeks where just a random name pops up on the leaderboard, and sure enough, no one has him. Yeah, like I said, it happens.
Yeah. This week we got, big names here once again. We look, it's a pretty loaded top of the field. We got DJ, we have Spieth, McIlroy, Thomas, Paul Casey here. That's the double-digit salary guys here. We'll start. You're taking a look at McIlroy, GPPs, and Casey. You're looking at, kind of starting off with cash games, although Casey's playable in all formats, of course.
Yeah, like we mentioned last week on the pod, Casey's streak still continues. He still finished inside the top 20. I mean, that's now 17 times out of 24 or something like that since missing the cut in 2017 Sony Open. So, I mean, Casey's stats, there is really not too much to say with him. He's first in the field for approaching the green. He's 14th in the field for birdies or better. So, yeah, at 10,200, I think Casey's a lock for both cash and GPPs. For Rory, he was quite popular last week. For him playing the first time at Pebble, it wasn't too surprising for him to miss the cut. His putter was just off, but Pebble is one of those courses where you kind of need to play once or twice just to get familiar with the greens. I think this course suits him much better, and I think this week would be a good bounce back week for Rory. If you look at his stats, I mean, he's 6th in the field for off the tee. He's 13th in the field for around the green. So I think with Spieth and DJ being the top 2 guys again, I think Rory will be overlooked. Same with Thomas, and I think he'll be a fine tournament option for the week.
Yeah, I like McIlroy. I mean, he's about 15-16% owned last week, and maybe that number drops a little bit given the fact that he did miss the cut. And you have some other options that are playing really well. You mentioned Spieth. Spieth's been, pretty, I guess, average to start the year here. I mean, at what rate do people start hopping off him because he's just not putting up huge numbers? Like the fantasy scoring, just Spieth hasn't really had that this year, but he's still coming in, 20-25% owned. Are we going to start to see drop-offs here soon with Spieth?
Yes and no. I think Spieth is just he calls it a mini slump with his putter. It's more not mechanical, but it's basically trying to get the trust back in his putter again. I think once he starts making more 15, 20 footers, those are the putts that he was used to make a lot a couple years ago. I think he'll still be popular. He'll probably be one of the more popular picks this week, just like last week. I kind of don't see it dropping, maybe slightly, depending if the slump continues. But it's probably going to happen, I would say, within the next month or so, especially before the Masters, that he might win or he'll contend once again.
Yeah, like I'm kind of waiting on him to, I would like to be ahead of the curve, but there isn't much of a curve to be ahead of just because, the ownership is still too high. But I mean, that's kind of a good thing because obviously, if Spieth goes off, you're kind of struggling if you do fade. But if Spieth keeps putting up some average performances and you keep dodging him, like you're going to be ahead of a good 25% of the field if, Spieth goes out and has, just another T20 or something around that range.
Exactly. And if you could look at his course history, I mean, he does have that miscut here back in 2016. So I think for me, I'm just going to fade him this week. Wait till we head to Florida. Maybe he'll start putting a lot better when we head down there. But as for this week, yeah, I think I'm just going to fade away and just pick basically Rory and Casey as my two top dogs for the week.
And then we look in this 9K range. It's Mickelson, Fleetwood, Berger, and Grace. You asked me before, if I was going back to Phil. Phil's been solid T2, T5 over his last two tournaments, up to 9,900. It is a price that we've seen Phil at before. It's not a price that I like to play Phil at, but there's no denying that he's playing pretty well. I think I just prefer some other options.
Yeah, I think Phil's one of those guys where if you play him a lot, then you will continue to play him. But if you haven't really played him too much, then yeah, you'll continue to basically fade him. I think for this week, if you're like in a one and done pool or something like that, I think he'll be a fine pick if you want to use him right away. He has made two cuts in a row here. He finished 34th last year and then 21st back in 2013. So yeah, they're okay finishes, but I think with that name and with the price there, I think he's still going to be popular, and I just like guys a little bit cheaper than him.
Yeah, I do too. That's kind of how I feel about Fleetwood's been playing, well on the Euro Tour. Has a couple of wins or one win. Played well in a couple of top tens. He's an interesting GPP option, like he was last year. Like he's just one of those guys who's just kind of all over the place when he plays on the PGA Tour. But he's an interesting GPP option, I think, if you're building a ton of lineups, to sprinkle in. But that's pretty much it because I like Grace. I think Berger's an interesting GPP option. I think Grace is my favorite out of this 9K range. But these are all viable tournament options because we're going to get to a tier that I think are just there's much more safer and just probably better value options. Right.
I'm sort of in agreement with you with this range. Berger is your perfect pivot option at the top here. Like he has a miscut back in 2016, but I mean his stats are relatively good. He's ninth in the field for off the tee, and he's 18th in the field for proximity. So I don't think too many people are going to play him because of Phil being right there, because of Fleetwood. And of course, there's another name at 8,800 that people will probably play him as well. But I think Berger is that low probably 12, 13%, maybe lower than that for this week. And I think that might be your winning ticket this week.
And let's talk that name at 8,800, Tiger Woods. He's 8,800. He's what, about 1,000 cheaper than when he was last out at the Farmers Insurance. I think he was about 9,700 or so. Didn't play particularly bad. He wasn't a great fantasy option. I think he finished around 65 fantasy points on DK. Having probably around 15 to 17% as far as ownership. I think that'll probably stay the same. I don't think it's going to be a huge drastic swing in ownership for Woods here this week.
Exactly. I think DraftKings did a good job on reducing his price. I think it's fair for Woods. At the Farmers, the way we talked about the way Woods hit it off the tee, that was his worst, basically his worst play. Woods has always talked about how everyone is good out here, but what's your bad? Is your bad okay that you can still make a score, or is your bad just totally off the planet? And if the Farmers was as worst as it can get, then I think we're in for pretty much a similar type of week, if not slightly better, maybe a top 15, maybe a top 10. Obviously, this is one of the few courses that he hasn't won here, but this is also a really good course history for him because he's been playing here or is coming here since like 94, 95 or something like that when he was an amateur. So, I mean, as you all know, I'm going to play Tiger. So I just haven't decided whether it's going to be 100% all in on Tiger or maybe make a lineup or two that doesn't have Tiger just in case.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like he's a viable option this week. I still think there's maybe a few other names in this range that I think I'd rather go with. One is Noren, who's $100 less. He's a guy I think is due for a win here fairly soon. And I think it could potentially come this week. Playing well to start the year, solid ball striker. 8,700 seems like a nice price for Noren. I think he's my favorite out of the kind of this upper 8K range. And I know you like Pat Perez as well. You don't have Pat Perez in your article this week. So maybe that was last week I'm thinking of. But yeah. Pat Perez is also another guy that I don't mind here.
Yeah, Pat Perez, we look at his stats. He's really solid for this year. I'm on the fence for him for this week, and it's usually after this week he tends to fall off a little bit. But if you look at his stats, I mean, he's third in strokes gained par 4 scoring. He's fourth in birdie or better percentage. So, I mean, he's going to be a fine play. His course history is okay. He has a miscut here back in 2016. Outside of that, he's been like a couple top 30s, basically finishing in the middle of the pack. As for Noren, he is getting really solid, especially like with his irons. Like he's 10th in the field for approach to the green. He's 12th for the strokes gained par 5 scoring. So the fact that he hasn't played here before it kind of worries me a little bit. But I think the way he's been playing as of late, I think he's a fine option for tournaments.
And before we kind of get into a heavier range here, I mean, do you like any of these other names that stand out to you? Finau, Kuchar, Leishman here.
I've always been a fan of Mark Leishman, just because he's very consistent. He has like 2 missed cuts here though in the last 3 years, but then in the middle of that, he's finished 5th here back in 2016. So as like a pivot away from someone like Kuchar, who I really like this week. I mean, he's he has a T8 finish here in 2016, and then he finished tied for 22nd last year. I think Kuchar is your good cash option just because he's only at 8,400. And Leishman will be your good tournament option just because he's usually not that popular. He's at max maybe 15-16% in ownership.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Tony Finau, it's the same old story with him. This is a course where, if he could putt, he'd probably do really, really well at. Obviously, a very solid ball striker. This is a long course. I think Finau, this could fit him very well. It's the same thing. Can he find the putter on the greens? If yes, then he has a solid shot at like a top 10. If not, you're probably just kind of looking at an average finish with him, which he's a fine option. I know he missed the cut at Waste Management, but he's not a guy who usually misses the cut too often.
No, and again, kind of like Pat Perez in a way where if you look at his stats, I mean, he's solid pretty much all around except for his putting. And then when you look at his course history here, he seems not to really get the grasp of Riviera. He missed the last 2 cuts here. So I think for him this week, I'm just going to fade him until we get to Florida. He tends to play a lot better in Florida just because the greens are smoother and he just likes putting them better than Poa. So I think I'm just going to fade Finau and just move on down to Ches Reavie.
Yeah, Reavie's a guy. We were talking a little bit about him before the show. One thing I know, if Finau is going to be popular this week, I think you can fade him. If his ownership is going to be a little bit lower, which you never really get a huge ownership bargain with Finau anyway. So if he ends up being a little bit overlooked, I think you can sprinkle him into GPPs. That's just my take on Finau this week.
Yeah, Finau is it's just one of those guys where it's a hit or miss. We've said it before. I'll say it again. Where if he has one of those weeks where his putter is basically average, then he'll actually do very well. But if he's the Finau that we know on Poa greens, then it might be a good week for to fade Finau and just wait till we head to Florida.
And then you mentioned Ches Reavie here, 8K, playing really, really well. T2 at Pebble Beach. I mean, second at the Waste Management. Hasn't missed a cut this year. 8K just doesn't seem expensive enough for him.
Yeah, this is just another. Well, last week was a week where it kind of taught us a lesson where not to overthink a player if he's playing well coming into the week. Just play him because he probably found a different gear than last year, and that's the case with Ches Reavie. He's a totally different player all of a sudden from last year into this year. So, yeah, he missed a cut here last year, but he finished 7th in 2016. And then if you use that with his recent performance, I mean, he's first in the field for par 4 scoring. So I think it's just best just to play him in cash games, and if you want to fade him in tournaments, because for some reason he's still 8,000, and I think because of that, he's probably going to be the highest owned player, I would imagine, this week.
Yeah,
I mean, I think just for cash, play Reavie, don't overthink it, and then for tournaments, I think there's probably a couple of other options just around him, maybe just below him, where you can fade him and hope that maybe this might be the week where the wheels fall off, but you just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, like you have like Streelman and you have Brendan Steele right there, 78 and 7,900. Like those are two other guys I I really like. Like I like those three names a lot. Like they're going to be guys that I rotate in and out of a lot of lineups because one, like they've just been playing really well. The solid floors, those are guys that I feel like I can trust in cash games, and I think they have some GPP upside. We've seen it with Steele already this year. We saw the upside out of Reeve obviously last week. Like I just feel comfortable using those guys, knowing that their floors are very solid, but they also have that top 15, top 10 type upside.
Right, and just like Reeve, I think Steele is. I don't know what he needs to do for DraftKings just to bump up his price like 500 to 1,000 more. He's still below 8,000. When you look at his stats, I mean, he's ninth in the field for birdies or better gain. He's ninth in the field for strokes gained per four scoring, and he's 10th in the field for off the tee. So, I mean, if you look at his course history here, he hasn't missed a cut in the last 5 years, and he has a top 10 finish back in 2014. With that being said, I think Reeve and Steele and even Streelman, those guys should be your core cash options for this week. And then maybe the next few weeks after this, just because they're just on form. And if DraftKings doesn't bump their price up like they haven't, then there's really no reason to fade them at all.
Yeah, like you look at like Reeve, like his ownership was, I think, an average about 13, 14%. I think in that $4 it was 17. I could see that being bumped up a little bit this week. And to your point, I mean, there are some ownership angles to be had. Like we saw a lot of these guys be kind of popular. I think if you look down a little bit lower, Kevin Chappell is interesting because I think he'll be overlooked in that area. He was only about 10% last week, and I think that's going to be about the case again this week, just because I think a lot of people will still go towards Steele, Reeve, potentially Finau, and I still think Rafael Cabrera Bio is another one who, 6,900. I don't think the ownership's going to be quite as high last week because his price jumped $1,000, but I still think that's a fair price for him.
Yeah, I don't mind playing Rafa or Chappell in tournaments for this week. Yeah, Rafa hasn't played here in the recent years, so that'll probably bump down his ownership just slightly. But I think he'll, like you said, he won't be as popular last week, but I think he'll still be somewhat popular, probably around that 17, 16% mark. And for Chappell, I mean, if you look at his stats, he's second in the field for off the tee, 11th in the field for par four scoring. I mean, yeah, he has a few missed cuts here, but he knows the track. He knows what to do. And if you're telling me Reeve is going to be 20% plus ownership, and then Chappell's probably going to be around 12, 11. I'm going to choose Chappell hands down over Reeve for tournaments.
And then we take a look. I mean, like you look at Ali Schneider-Jansky should be another popular one. A couple top 10s to start off the new year. Didn't mix the cut at the Farmers Insurance Open, but he's a guy at 7,600. With the type of upside that he has, I think he's going to be somewhat popular this week too.
Yeah, I kind of like Ali as well, just because of his stats. I mean, he's first in the field for birdies a better percentage. So with that, and it's all of his other stats that I'm looking at, it's pretty much average, just above average. And then, I mean, he finished in the top 10 here last year. So I think it's 7,600. He's going to be a fine cash play for sure. And maybe for tournaments, go to someone like Jason Kokrak, I think might be a good option for tournaments. His stats are really solid once again. And then if you just have a look at, I mean, his history here. I mean, he's made the cut here in the last 3 years. He had a runner-up finish in 2016. So I think for Kokrak, I'm going to play him in tournaments, and for Ollie, I think is a fine cash option.
Anyone else in this mid sevens? I mean, should we talk Adam Scott, 7,400? A guy who wasn't that belly priced last week. Didn't play particularly well. 7,400. That's gotta be a low for him, right?
In recent years, it has to be. I really don't know what to say with Adam Scott. I mean, if you look at his course history, you play him. But recently, I don't know what's wrong with this game. I mean, his stats are okay, but he's just not scoring. His putter is just way off. Apparently, he's using like a Bernard Longer's method where you still have your long putter, but you're basically moving your thumb just slightly away from your chest. But I guess it's not working for him. I don't know. I have to wait a few weeks just to see what's happening. It's a little iffy for me.
Yeah, I mean, there are some other guys down in this lower sevens range. Austin Cook was a big letdown for a lot of people last week. I don't necessarily mind him here. You also have Charles Howell, who's 7,300. He's down in this range. What do you think of Howell this week?
I mean, 7,300, kind of like Scott, is a little cheap for him.
But this was like last year with Howell. Like we had Howell, I think, down at these prices where he became like an automatic plug and play.
Yeah, last year it was Charles Howell and Brendan Steele that were like just your lock plays at the beginning of the year, just to play in the cash and forget about it. This year for Howell, though, I mean, if you look at his stats, it's okay. But if you look at his like course history, I mean, yeah, he's made the cut here the last 3 years. He finished top 15 here last year. And then if you look at his recent play, I mean, yeah, top 10 at the Farmers, a couple top 30s. Before that, I mean, at 7,300, I think he's going to be somewhat popular just because of the price, kind of like RCB last week. So for that, I think I'm going to fade him for tournaments, and then I might squeeze him in for cash plays for this week.
Yeah, he's definitely a guy that I'd rather use in cash games. I think there's some different GPP options I'd rather look at a little bit more. The lower sevens are interesting. Like there's a couple names that stood out to me. Vegas is 7,200. Look at Sang-Moon Bae, who I think is going to be a little bit popular coming off, this past week, T15 for him. But the guy that I have a lot of interest in is James Hahn at 7,100, playing really well to start the year. Given the fact that his price dropped quite a bit, he was 8,400 last week, played pretty well. Like I'm going to go back to well, I think, with Hahn here.
Yeah, I think that's a fine play. I mean, the only bad stat that he really has right now is his around the green, where he's basically in the bottom of the field with that stat. But everything else is basically above average. And then he actually won here back in 2015. So with that and being so cheap that he is, yeah, I kind of like that play for tournaments. Not too many people will play him for sure.
Anyone else you got below the 7K mark that you're taking a look at?
It's basically the only other guy that I like is that men's salary is Tom Hoge. I mean, when you look at Hoge's stats, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Brendan Harkins when I mentioned him last week.
Humble brag.
Well, I mean, Harkins. It was funny. Harkins first, he was one of those players that I was hoping to have a good Sunday. Nothing really happened the first 9 holes, and then all of a sudden he's just started making birdies out of nowhere. And sure enough, he finished, I think, inside the top 20 for sure. But no, I mean, Hoagie's stats are sort of similar to Harkins. I mean, he's 6th in the field for approach the green, and he's also 6th in the field for proximity. And he's 22nd in the field for birdies or better. He has a T39 finish here back in 2015, and I do believe this is one of the courses where, kind of like Pebble, kind of like Augusta, where you need to play at least once or twice just to get familiar with it. And I think at mid-price with, he did miss the cut last 2 weeks, but with that, his ownership will be less than like 5% for sure, maybe less than 3%. You can't go wrong with a mid-price guy here with how good his stats look and the fact that he actually played here before. So yeah. I kind of have to go with him, right?
Yeah, I mean, when you mention possibly the missed cuts, like you're taking that risk with the guy that are this cheap, to the point where he may not completely kill your lineup. Yeah, he's going to ruin the fact that you're going to miss out on potential a huge finish. But I mean, if he hits, you're opening up a lot of salary for other guys, and if he misses a cut, like you're not exactly killed right off the bat at that price.
Yeah, with Hoagie, he allows me to pair Tiger up with one of the big guys at top, either like a Rory or even a Dustin Johnson. And I think that's what you kind of need to do this week, is to sort of go a little stars and scrubs, because I do believe one of the top guys will actually win this week.
Yeah, like I think I'm going back to the well. Like I think DJ can win this one, but I think obviously there's a lot of potential in, like, if it's not DJ, like it's probably like a Casey, or I even think Thomas has a shot this week too.
Like if we're just gonna look at the top guys, it's hard not to say DJ. Like his last 2 starts was he won the Tournament of Champions, and he had a runner-up finish last week. So I mean, that's kind of what you want for the guy that's priced at the top. But outside of him, I think I think Paul Casey might actually will do it this week. I think he will find something, and I think he's going to be the winner.
If you got a dark horse, someone that's completely kind of out of the norm as far as the top guys go, who would you pick?
Oof.
I know, because you just said like you expect one of the top guys to win it, but if you had to pick someone lower,
I'm not allowed to say Tiger, am I?
No, you can't say Tiger.
He's not a dark horse, eh? Okay. I'm going to have to say Ollie Snyderchance as a nice little dark horse pick, being ranked first in the birdie better percentage. And then if you look at his history, I mean, he finished here in the top 10 last year. So yeah, I think with this form, I think Ollie might take it down if it's not one of the top guys.
Yeah, I like that call. I think Kevin Chappell's my guy, so kind of in that same range. He would be the guy that I'd take a look at.
Yeah, I like both plays for sure this week.
So, that's going to wrap it up for us. You can head over to dailyfantasycafe.com. You can check out Chris's article over on Daily Fantasy Cafe. You were also mentioned Fantasy Overlay or Daily Fantasy Overlay, they run a rankings, and you ranked first, I think, over the past couple of weeks. I don't know if you saw that.
I did not see that. No, that's amazing, actually.
Yeah. So congratulations to you. You got to keep that going. I'll pop the tweet back out. But yeah, they mentioned you on there as well. So
awesome. I'll definitely keep the ball rolling this week and hopefully throughout the season. That's amazing.
That's it for us. We'll see you guys next week.